Welcome back, everyone. Next, we have Immuron Limited. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol IMRN and on the ASX under the symbol IMC. It's a biopharmaceutical company focused on developing and commercializing orally delivered targeted polyclonal antibodies for the treatment of infectious diseases. So happy to welcome its CEO, Steve Lydeamore. Nice to see you, Steve, and welcome to the conference.
Yeah, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. You can probably tell from the picture on the opening slide that we're focusing on targeted pathogens, and that's one of the bugs that we're targeting. Just quickly, Immuron is a small biotech company, but interesting in that it has a commercial product on the market, Travelan, which we sell for prevention of travelers' diarrhea. And as you would imagine, during COVID, not too many people were traveling and sales weren't very good. And I have a slide coming up soon that shows that. And during that time also, we had an inability to progress our clinical program, but that's all changed. We're post the pandemic now, and sales have grown more than 100% last year. And in the 9 months to date this financial year, we're up some 154%. So sales are growing very, very strongly on the back of increasing international travel. So international travel in Australia and in the US is both coming back to pre-pandemic levels, which is great. And we've upped our sales and marketing efforts and appointed an experienced person from GlaxoSmithKline and Procter & Gamble that's doing a great job. Most of those sales growth is coming from Australia at the moment, and we plan in the coming financial year to really step up our activities in USA and Canada. In the US, we launched just in July last year on Amazon.com and last month on Walmart.com. And in Canada, we're just starting the process of getting back into retail pharmacy. So expect strong growth from both of those regions and a maintenance of that growth in Australia. But the commercial product is not the only thing that we do. We're also a biopharmaceutical company. And as mentioned at the beginning, we have a platform technology focused on infectious diseases. And we collaborate with the US Department of Defense on developing a number of products for targeted pathogens that are of interest to them. And we have 3 therapeutics in 4 clinical programs. So Travelan itself is also in a phase 4 trial, a large study being conducted by the US military university, the Uniformed Services University, and 866 personnel from both the UK and US military traveling to high-risk regions. That's run and funded by themselves. The Department of Defense, with grant funding and directly for the Camp ETech program, also fund 2 of our phase 2 studies. So we just completed phase 2 on IMM124E. This is the active drug substance in Travelan. We were trialling a once-a-day dose of Travelan in a controlled human infection model study. This was done in Baltimore, Maryland. We just read out top-line results on the 7th of March, and positive reaction from the market on the back of that data, and together with the previous phase 2 studies and preclinical and safety data that we have, we're planning to have an end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA in around July, August, following completion of the clinical trial report. So we're looking to move into phase 3 with that program. The Camp ETech program, which is a vaccine developed by the US Navy, we just completed dosing phase 2 of that, and the top line data is due out in around July of this year. So we have some rich milestones coming up. We have the 3rd clinical program, IMM529. This is targeting Clostridioides difficile infection. So this is a super bug that occurs in hospitals, and it's one of those pesky type bugs that even when you treat it with antibiotics, it keeps coming back. And so we're targeting initially recurrent CDI, and I have a forecast coming up and telling you what that might look like. We're also hopeful that we can go beyond that. So what is this market that we're targeting? It's $1 billion market. So travelers' diarrhea alone, it's a $1 billion market. It's growing at a growth rate of around 7%. And so what is travelers' diarrhea? If you look down the bottom left there, you'll see the pathogens which cause it. And the the biggest cause of it is ETEC, which is enterotoxigenic E. coli. And Travelan has been designed with 13 different strains of E. coli, ETEC, and it works against those. And we have a number of other products in development, Campylobacter that I mentioned before, together with the Navy. But the good thing is we worked with the US Army, and we did research in Asia, testing Travelan against a number of pathogens that they isolated from military personnel. And the good news is, even though it's designed to work against ETEC, it has cross-reactivity against up to 180 different targeted pathogens, including Shigella and Salmonella, which are some of the other problem children for travelers' diarrhea, as well as Vibrio cholera. Now, the Centers for Disease Control estimate that between 30 and 70% of people travelling to high-risk regions will experience travelers' diarrhea. And that's the case whether you're the military travelling into such regions for military purposes, or vacationers travelling to, in the case of American and Canadian customers, that might be down to Mexico or to the Caribbean. So 30 to 70% of the time you might expect to have your holiday interrupted with traveller's diarrhea. Nobody wants that. Unfortunately, there are no preventative medicines approved by the FDA for traveller's diarrhea. At present, most people will be taking either loperamide or brand name Imodium or rehydration salts after they get it. Now, that doesn't stop you feeling unwell on holiday, and the one opportunity that you do have is to take Travelan. So for those of you traveling soon, I suggest that you check out either Amazon.com or Walmart.com and go and buy yourself and try some for yourself. Let me just explain what our technology platform is. And it's interesting in that we develop targeted vaccines for specific pathogens. And I mentioned before ETEC as an example for Travelan. Now, we inject that into a pregnant cow. And you might ask, why are we injecting cows when we're targeting human diseases? Well, it comes down to the fact that cows have a unique system where a calf is born without immunity due to the thickness of the placental wall. So in humans, immunity passes from the mother to the child through the placental wall. It doesn't happen like that in cows. In cows, it comes through that first milk, which is colostrum. Now, you may have heard of colostrum. It's that first milk is full of bioactives, which are good for you. And all of those are retained in the product that we sell. But in addition to that, when the cow is injected with a vaccine for a targeted pathogen, it produces polyclonal antibodies for that specific pathogen, which are expressed in that colostrum. So we collect this colostrum, rich in bioactives, plus the polyclonal antibodies, and we process it, turn it into a spray-dried powder, compress that into a tablet, which becomes the final product. And the good news is that it's not an antibiotic, so it has no issues with antimicrobial resistance, and it doesn't actually kill the bug. It just inactivates it, neutralizes that toxin, and clears it from the gut, stopping it from causing problems like traveller's diarrhea. Now, in Australia, we have label claims approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and similarly in Canada from Health Canada, so for prevention and relief for traveller's diarrhea. But in the US, because colostrum is a dietary supplement, which is how we sell the product, we don't have those label claims. And for that reason, we're developing Travelan, IMM124E, as a medicine. And that's why we're going through the phase 2, phase 3 process to get it approved as biological for prescription by physicians. This is that graph I was talking about before. And obviously the left-hand side of the graph where sales drop down to almost zero is not something we really want to see. But the graph on the right certainly is. So growth up more than 100% last year and up 154% in the 9 months to this year. And if you took a ruler out, you might see by the end of the financial year to take it off the top of that chart. So sales are growing very, very strongly. This is a summary of our clinical portfolio, and I've spoken through most of this before, but you can see here that all of these programs, other than IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile, are partnered with the US Department of Defense in one way or the other. So the IMM124E Travelan, the phase 2 trial that we just completed, was conducted in collaboration with the US Navy. The Traveland Phase 4 study that I mentioned has been conducted by the military university, the Uniformed Services University, and the Camp E-Tech program using a Navy vaccine for injecting our cows is also funded by grant money from the US Department of Defense. So the R&D program, even though it's quite large for a small company like ourselves, is not a drag on our cash so much in that it's funded mostly through grant or directly through US Department of Defense funding. I really like this slide, and I present it every time I meet with shareholders or investors. And what we like to do is for each of the clinical programs is to explain what's the next steps, what are those milestones which are anticipated to drive value. All of those that are shown here in blue are those things that we'd previously projected but have been completed. So we like to walk the talk, so to speak. And so we've achieved a lot in the last year or so. And there are some rich milestones coming up for each of these programs. I mentioned for Traveland, the clinical study report is due out around June, July, and that's what we require to request that end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. For Camp E-Tech, the top line results are due because it's finished dosing just recently, around the end of our financial year, probably around July though, for that particular study. The Uniformed Services University Phase 4 study for Traveland down the bottom there. We're looking to complete enrolment towards the end of this financial year. Our financial year ends around June of this year, and top line results by the end of the calendar year. And IMM 529 for Clostridioides difficile, we're planning on filing the pre-IND submission with the FDA by the end of the financial year, with a view to having an FDA meeting next year. Now, I joined Immuron less than 2 years ago, and because of that graph where I showed during COVID that there was a pause, if you like, for roughly 2 years of clinical trial activity, I wanted to make sure that our clinical programs should progress. Should we invest that money to progress them into phase 2 and phase 3? And so I hired Lydeamore, which is a well-regarded US-based market and research company, to have a look at the market potential for IMM124E for travelers diarrhea and IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile. I wanted to make sure that the market opportunities still exist. So not just looking at standard of care, which is antibiotics in the case of IMM529, but also other products which are in the pipeline with competitor companies. And the good news is they came back for each program and said in the US market alone, which was the focus of this research, roughly US $100 million market potential each year. And we're talking about a sales forecast here, not total addressable opportunity. So a sales forecast for US alone for each product is around US $100 million. Now, in the case of IMM529, I mentioned before that this was based on targeting recurrent CDI. So this is when someone's already been treated with antibiotics and they get recurrence because the bug comes back, and it does, and it could happen multiple times. We forecast here based on that, but our product, and I'll show the mechanism of action slide a little bit later, we think we could move up the chain into primary treatment, which opens up a much larger opportunity. So the total market for this product, so total addressable market, is around $1.7 billion, a much larger opportunity. So I get asked this question. So IMM124E just completed phase 2. What happens next? Okay, so showing the history here, it goes back quite some time, phase 1, phase 2. We're looking to have that end of phase 2 meeting, during which we'll discuss with the FDA phase 3 protocols. Now, the good news is we have had the discussions with the FDA prior to COVID. And so we have a pretty good idea what that might look like. So it's likely to be 2 phase 3 trials, each of having about 600 subjects each in a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. Each trial would take roughly 2 years, and each trial would roughly cost around $5 million. And we'd be looking to run both of those in parallel, given the likelihood of success in our view. And That's not too far away. So quickly, not too far away. So 2027 would be probably the earliest registration date for Travelan as a drug. And what does this do for Immuron? Immuron would then open up the other half of the market that we don't actually address at the moment. So even though we have the product on the market as an over-the-counter product, roughly 50% of people traveling to high-risk regions seek advice from their physician or healthcare practitioner. And we're not part of that market at the moment because we're not an approved drug. And so we would be able to do that, as well as getting the benefit of having the product reimbursed by insurers, etc. Right, back to this slide I mentioned before, that our product, IMM529 for Clostridioides difficile, has the world's first triple mechanism of action. So it works not only on toxin B, which is the target for most products for CDI, but also on the vegetative cells and also the spores. So triple mechanism of action. We have an oral product, which is good as well. At the moment, it's 3 times daily, but we'd look to see whether we could move that into twice or one time daily. And our preclinical data showed very, very good efficacy potential. So we're looking to have a pre-IND, as I mentioned before, by the end of the financial year, file with the FDA with a view to starting a phase 1/2 study next calendar year. And I might just pause there for questions. You can see my contact information there. I'll bring this slide back up, but while I wait for questions to come through, I might just leave this slide up on the screen here. For those that are scientifically minded, all of the preclinical research that we have done mostly has been published, and you can see that here for IMM124E Travelan and also for IMM529. Published data, both preclinical, animal studies, as well as human clinical data. And for Travelan, the previous phase 2 study done in Poland, the Otto study, showed up to 90.9% effectiveness in prevention of travelers' diarrhea. This is what gives us confidence going into phase 3. So back to you for questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Yes. Speaking of Travelan, Jamie wants to know, what does the competition look like for that product? Are there other options out there? And how does the sales team look to make sure your product is chosen?
Yes. As an over-the-counter medicine, there really isn't any alternative. People do try antibiotics. Mostly, as I mentioned before, people take medicines with them to treat it after they get it. So this would be a loperamide for stopping bowel movements, oral rehydration, salts for replenishing electrolytes after you've had diarrhea. So the challenge for us is actually to get people to know that the option to have a product like Travelan, which prevents, exists. So at the moment, we've just really started activities in the US, and that's through Walmart.com and Amazon.com. We're doing a lot of targeted advertising on social media, but we are just starting the process of getting into retail pharmacy as well. And when category reviews come up during the next 12 months or so, we'll be pitching to get our product onto the shelf. As a medicine, so I mentioned we're going through that regulatory process to get it approved as a medicine. Yeah, we would become the first approved medicine for prevention of travelers' diarrhea. And with that, you get the Centers for Disease Control, which, if you read it at the moment for travelers' diarrhea, just recommends good hygiene. So be careful what you eat, be careful what you drink, wash your hands, all those sorts of things. We'd be looking to get our product onto their recommendation, a bit like you do for other vaccines that you might take traveling to high-risk regions, whether it be for hepatitis A, B, typhoid, cholera, yellow fever, depending on where you're going. We'd like Travelan to be on that recommended list for travel to high-risk regions. And as far as we're aware, there aren't really any other products that are in the pipeline for others that will do what Travelan is targeting to do, and that's preventing travelers' diarrhea not only from ETEC, enterotoxigenic E. coli, but as I mentioned before, cross-reactivity against 180 different pathogens.
Wow. And Ted Wade asks, did you say phase 2 should be completed in July or August? And at that point, you begin phase 3, if you can clarify?
Yeah, so for Travelan, IMM124E, phase 2 has been completed. The clinical study reports are due around July, August for that program. Camp ETech has also completed dosing phase 2, and the top line results are due around July. And for Travelan, that's the product that we're targeting the end of phase 2 meeting and taking into phase 3 next calendar year.
And Tanya King wants you to clarify, will this be over the counter?
At the moment, it's over the counter. The clinical program we're going through would make it a medicine, and so it would become a prescription product, so behind the counter. That's not to say that we couldn't keep a version of the product on the market as an over-the-counter product. We'll explore that further when we get closer to that point in time.
And Marion Sullivan asks, do you have any military contacts, or are you seeking them, or contracts?
We have current military contracts which are funding our program. So for IMM124E, we have a contract grant funding for that. So we're conducting that study with a external CRO, and that's being funded with US Department of Defense grant money. We have a contract with the Naval Medical Research Command for the Camp ETech program, and they're running that study at Johns Hopkins University with their own funding. And the Uniformed Services University, our contract with them is simply to provide Travelan for the trial that they're conducting for military purposes. That's the phase 4 study in 866 military personnel traveling to high-risk regions, all funded by them. So multiple contacts within the Department of Defense and multiple contracts and grant funding.
And Jared Patterson asks, with your current and future products after development, do you take them to market on your own, or do you need partners?
We haven't determined that yet. Probably as a registered medicine. Traveller's diarrhea, potentially, we might take that to market ourselves, but certainly not globally. We would be looking for partners around the globe. For things like Clostridioides difficile, which is a hospital-based infection, we'd likely partner with that with someone that specialises in that space.
And Yvonne Davis wants to know, what's your current cash position? Do you need to go to the market?
Our cash position at the end of December was Australian dollars, $15 million. Do we need to go to the market? Not at present. So we have a pretty long cash runway. Depends, though, on these clinical programs. So if we take IMM529 into clinical trials for Clostridioides difficile, we may need funding because that one's not funded by the Department of Defense.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation and important work you're doing. If you have any closing remarks for our viewers, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you everybody for listening. It's been my pleasure. Just in closing, why should you invest in Immuron? Product on the market, generating cash flow, grant money from the US Department of Defense. So relatively strong cash position, not looking to go to the market in the near term unless we're successful in getting those INDs approved for new programs. We have a product growing strongly. We have 3 therapeutics in 4 clinical programs, which is quite a lot for a company of the market cap of our size. So have a look. And if you have any questions, my direct contact information is here. So that's my email address, my personal phone number. Please feel free to give me a call if you have any follow-up questions. So thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. We look forward to following along with some future updates. Thanks for being on our conference today.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Well, that completes day 1. We will see you all back here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern for day 2 of our Virtual Investors Conference. Thanks for joining. See you tomorrow.